If you can't hit better lifts on comp day than you did on testing, then you're not peaking right. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to fix that. I'm going to give you the framework that I use with my athletes, who are some of the best athletes in the world. We're going to discuss how you should taper your lifting, how to break that down into phases, what they mean, and what you can do on competition day to add 5 to even 10% more than you tested. This is how you get PBs on competition day. So testing a week out is a common practice, and this will absolutely always kill your gains. The result of this will, you either hit the same number, might get a little bit more, but more often than not, we end up doing worse, okay? We actually need to be hitting more on competition day because that's what we're training for. So here are the 3 steps that we're going to cover in more detail. First, we're going to go over the 3 stages of tapering, okay, and how a deload works. This method will allow you to add about 5 to 10% on your performance. Then we're going to talk about how to test or when to test, right, based off numerous factors such as neurological profile. Then we're going to learn how to eat and prime the nervous system in the last few days leading to the competition and on the day. So, number 1, stages of peaking, the physical recovery. Here we want to start to dial down the intensity and start to slowly dial down the volume. Usually about a 5 to 10% reduction normally starts to do pretty well to start to recover the joints, start to recover any sort of pain. Now, this is a flexible number. This really comes down to whether an athlete is got some injuries that they've been nursing, some pain that they've been nursing, and we may either shorten or lengthen this physical recovery, or we might go a little bit more aggressive. And if we do, we have to consider some other variables that impact your peaking. So we need the physical recovery. This is going to take about 10 to 14 days. Now, this is different because now we have to consider neurological recovery. So we have to balance this between physical and neurological. We can't dial down that intensity and volume too much, or we will start to detrain. Right? But we have to do enough to allow the nervous system to still be primed to express the maximum amount of strength. All right. All the things you're doing in training are going to be leading to this point, which you've accumulated all this volume and intensity, all right, that is stimulating the nervous system to express strength, but has been inhibited by fatigue because that's the process of getting stronger. We need to recover that aspect to start to reduce the fatigue. But what happens when we reduce the fatigue? The nervous system starts to downregulate, right? Your expression of strength starts to decrease. So normally you can still train at about 88 to 83%, or you can talk about 6 to maybe 7 RPE. And this will prevent any sort of detraining. This is where the next part comes in, the layer number 3, all right? This is the neurological priming. So now we're trying to remove the fatigue completely by taking plummeting down the volume and intensity, but we need to keep enough in there to keep the nervous system active. So fatigue comes down, the nervous system is still highly active to express strength, and when the fatigue is low for extended periods of time, the nervous system downregulates and we detrain. So this happens when we test the week out and then we rest for an entire week, right? That's a very common practice. And when we rest for the entire week, we're downregulating the nervous system, right? We can't express that strength. Now, this is best done in the final 1 to 3 days, okay? I will train people all the way up to the day before. Now, there is research to support basically how neurological priming, what the best timing for neurological priming is. And they did it on, I'm pretty sure it was done on sprinters. So they tested what would be like 8 hours before, 24 hours before, 48 hours before, to see when will be the last best session. It turns out that 8 hours before was much better. I don't do that. I focus on about 24 hours. So I go for the next best thing. All right. I have dabbled a little bit in the day before, but both results in terms of 24 hours or 8 hours had produced the same pretty good results. Now, in this session, you're not really going heavy. It's about a 30-minute session, normally working up to about, say, 50 to 65% for a single 1 or 2 sets. The entire session should take about 30 minutes. That's enough to keep the nervous system primed and ready to go. So when should you test? Well, definitely not 1 week out. That introduces so much fatigue that we don't have enough neurological recovery over that time frame. Now, if we were to go back and have a look at that neurological recovery time frame, this is different for everyone. So for more advanced lifters who are very neurologically efficient, we might be doing 14, even up to 24 days or 21 days before they compete, starting the slow taper of the neurological recovery. Now, this is based off training age most of the time and your strength, but this incorporates with how we're going to test. So the sweet spot for most beginners to intermediate, if you're very beginner, you can get away with maybe a week out. But when you get to that late beginner to intermediate stage, that 10 to maybe 14 days is usually the best time. It might be your last heavy deadlift is 3 weeks out. Your last heavy squat might be 14 days out. Last heavy bench may be 10 days out. Okay. Now, depending on how you've structured your program, you could be testing all 3, maybe 3 weeks out, then tapering down to just testing your openers to keep in some sort of relative intensity before then tapering off the intensity and volume. Now, you might think, that's so far away. How am I going to know what to do? Well, that's how you figure it out. On about 3 weeks out, you work out the result of all your training. That'll give you an indicator of what you should do for about a second attempt. Then in week 2, that's a really good time to have a look at your openers or just keep the nervous system active at around that number, which is roughly about 88 to 93%. That's about where your openers should be. Okay. And so that's the start of the intensity tapering, allowing you physical recovery and neurological recovery. Individual factors. So there is a thing called neurological profiling. Okay. Neurological profiling is that there are different nervous system types, and these nervous system types determine the recoverability, the efficiency of recovery, the efficiency of power output. Now, it's a bit outside the scope of this video, but there are 3 main classes to this. Most powerlifters are going to sit between, they say, a type 1 and a type 2. All right, type 2, you're going to have roughly that 7 to 14 day mark. The type 1, right, most top level competitors, majority of them are in the type 1. You can put them in the class of people who are naturally hyper explosive, very explosive, they're very powerful, right? Those people usually in general need less volume, need more recovery, right? And they need more neurological recovery periods. So that 14 to 21 days is normally better for them. And that gives you a rough timeline on when to do physical recovery, neurological recovery, and when to prime. And yeah, specific ranges. Anything less than 10 days doing max is just too close for anyone. But it does come down to what training you just have been doing. So only reason I might still go really heavy, really close would be because we didn't have any volume or any intensity leading up into this prep. So it pays to go heavy because we have no active nervous system stimulated to a high level. So there's nothing to maintain. we need to stimulate it. So we push heavy if we only have a short period. Now, that's a very specific case. Now I want to just dive into a little bit about what supercompensation is. So supercompensation is the effect of what gives us that extra 5 to 10%. So this starts with the training we do before. We train ourselves and accumulate volume and intensity in a strategic way that creates a stimulus for both an adaptation to increase strength, but also a recovery response. Now, it's that recovery response that matters, because the more we drive the training, the body becomes more efficient at recovery, right? And this drives the nervous system up, but it's being suppressed by the amount of stimulus, all right, you're applying, the amount of fatigue, the amount of intensity, the amount of volume. So we're going to have battling against the stimulus, the recovery, and the body wants to try to compensate, okay? It is detecting a high level of stress. And so these responses are going to it's going to cause you to try and adapt, right? And this is the start of the process of the supercompensation. It's trying to overcome a really huge stress. Then we allow it time to recover. So this is where we start to go through that tapering stage, okay? And as we taper, the body still has this need to hyper recover, but you can't taper too quickly. If you taper too quickly, all right, there is no need for this hyper response. And so it just detrains, right? You can't express that strength very well. So we have to be strategic with the timing, allowing enough stimulus to maintain that response, but dialing them down a bit to get the physical recovery and start to recover the nervous system slowly, and then tapering the volume right near the end, timing that with the neurological priming. And then this is where we experience the performance rebound. So there's a period of time, when you time this correctly, that we're going to have the ability to express 5 to 10% more than you just did a week ago. I know this affects so well that I predict this with most of my lifters. I predict that we're probably going to add 5 to 10%. And I strategically pick the right attempts to put us in a position to get the most out of this. Then fine-tuning. Now, this is aligning the recovery and intensity, which intersects perfectly. And this requires practice. Right? Got to find a routine that works for you, and then continue to reiterate that. When you think about those 3 stages and how you're going to time it, this is what determines it. If you're in doubt, train longer, okay? But with about 5 to 10% less intensity and about 10 to 20% less volume. You may do more, right? If you're more neurologically efficient, or if you're stronger, bring it down more, or you want to keep it higher for longer if you're still that beginner to early intermediate stage. Final peaking strategies. So there's a lot you can get out of manipulating your nutrition that will also give you supercompensation. It'll incorporate really well with the supercompensation from training, but there's also supercompensation metabolically. Now, you can only do this most effectively if you've been cutting. That's a completely different talk, okay? If you've been cutting and dieting in a deficit for a while, you're going to get the same compensation effect, but with nutrition. This compensation is going to allow a higher store of glycogen. It's almost like that rebound effect. If anyone here has done bodybuilding, when you have been dieting for a long time and you go and prep, stand on stage, do your posing, finish the competition, and you start eating and training again, you get really strong and really big. We're manipulating the same process, but we're incorporating that in with powerlifting now. So we have the neurological supercompensation, and we can have metabolic supercompensation. This is when you start to incorporate carb loading. This is quite effective in between 3, even up to 10 days out. It really depends how much weight we have to give, right? Now, if you haven't been cutting, this can still work, all right? We still want very full glycogen stores. This is roughly about 5 to 6 grams per kilo of body weight. You'd have about, say, 3 to 5 days out. If you already have pretty high carbohydrates, it's not going to matter. You're not going to get a metabolic supercompensation, but you still want your glycogen stores full as possible, as well as carbohydrates on the day. Probably want about the same amount of carbohydrates on the day. However, eating food on the day draws a lot of blood toward the stomach for digestion and puts you in a rest and digest state. This rest and digest state makes it really hard to drive the nervous system up to perform. After experimenting a lot with this, the best approach seems to be that one big meal, breakfast, is pretty much all you need. The rest of the day is best using really simple foods, sandwich, chips, lollies, and majority of the carbohydrates coming from carb powder or Powerade. Like carb powder a little bit better, you can get a large amount, especially if you've got to have a large amount to fulfill your carbohydrate needs. Competition approach. Now, this is how you get the most out of your supercompensation. Openers are strategically placed to gauge how the supercompensation is going to work. You do have to consider the skill of the athlete or your skill. If you're still quite new to this, all right, you're not going to be able to take as much of advantage of this. But because you're new, you usually get a lot of progress anyway, so you're probably going to be able to jump. Still something to take into consideration. So if we're fairly confident, we don't want to be open too heavy to introduce fatigue, but we want to be close enough to make a decision whether we're going to hit what we hit in testing or we can jump a little bit further. Okay. Now, the goal is not to take full advantage of it. It's to ensure that our strategy that we implemented, we're ensuring we're going to have its success and that we're going to be able to get that extra in the third attempt. Now, every attempt matters. Why it matters is because after testing this with a few athletes, especially the strongest, like Sarah, we implemented a strategy where we tried to hit a 775 kilo total. However, the first time we attempted, it wasn't successful because it wasn't the only thing we focused on. So what we did is that we recognized that the fatigue accumulated from taking third attempts really mattered and how much we opened really mattered. If we keep the opener about on the lower end and take a really big jump, we don't really introduce any fatigue. So if the ego comes in and you want to hit closer to your max, so mainly because ego or confidence, okay, then you introduce fatigue, which then impacts your second attempt, which then impacts your third attempt, which then impacts your bench, impacts your deadlift. So we know what number we're going to hit for our second attempt. And we're confident with the number we're going to hit. So opener, really light. We jump 20, 30 kilos. Second attempt, we hit it. Now, in this case, for Sarah's 775, for the biggest total a female has done in the world, we skipped the third because we always got a decrease in deadlift performance. Now, I'm not saying this is what you should do. Right? This is an example of why your attempt selections matter. Okay, now to summarize this all up, the path to peak performance on competition day. Your last heavy session matters. Schedule this usually from 10 to 14 days before the competition. If you're a little bit on the stronger side, probably about the 10 to 21 days before the competition. And then taper it down. Balance volume and intensity. Start the taper early, really slowly. You want to accumulate all the way down to roughly anywhere between 60 and 30% reduction, but over a really slow rate, with the majority of the drop happening in the last 5 days. Intensity will maintain till about 5 to 6 days out before we have a significant drop from about to 85% and below. Priming your nervous system, keeping training to prevent detraining. You have to continue to train all the way through, okay, until the day before. Now, this session, 60, maybe 70% of your max for a single 1 to 2 sets. Don't be afraid. This is not going to fatigue you. This is going to make you feel good. A good rule of thumb is that you would only train as much as that makes you feel good. Because there's always a point in training. It's like you start to wake up, start to move well. As soon as you hit that point, that's the best time. Right? That's the best time to stop. Execute based off readiness. So predict for supercompensation. Also predict that it won't happen. Okay. This is all going to be based off the numbers you did 2 to 3 weeks out. You're going to find your second attempts, and then you're going to choose where that's going to sit for your second attempt. Then pick your opener based off how well you know you can predict your jump, and whether that is going to be over the baseline of testing, the same, or under. And you're going to have that room. So we want that opener to be roughly about, say, 7 RPE. And if it feels lighter, you go for it. If it feels heavier, probably maintain or slightly go under. But if you've done this right, you're going to be able to always hit your target or more. Save most of it for your third attempt. Peaking 1 week out feels comfortable because that's what a lot of people do. That's what a lot of programs have. That's what a lot of coaches teach. But I think it really comes from a place of anxiety and lack of confidence. We've got to trust our body a little bit more, because science indicates that we're going to better perform if we give our body the space to recover. And it's complicated. So we have to understand the physical needs, the neurological needs, even the psychological needs. And understanding how our body responds to tapering and how our body stays active really matters. And this takes time. What I've given you today is a framework to make a start on that. And the best way to start, I would say, is at least move your testing a little bit further out and train for a little bit longer, all the way to the day of the competition. This will immediately start to give you more results. Then every competition, tweak it a little bit more using these principles, right? And very quickly, you'll start to see an increase on your competition performance. One last point. When I'm working with my athletes, we measure, at a certain point, we start to measure competition max and gym max separately. I will always use gym max in their training, and then we track their competition max separately. That's because their competition max is always so high that they never can hit it in training, because we manipulate supercompensation. It's something that we can't have all year round. And if we can get our baseline up, we already can predict we're going to get 5 to 10% more on competition day. So that's it, folks. If you enjoyed, give me a like, subscribe, all that jazz.